Howdy, it's Kyle, taking a look at the best place to live in each state if you're rich. Normally we look at the most affordable places. Housing has gotten so expensive. What are the cheapest places you can live? What is the best bang for your buck? But here, I want to look at the other end of the spectrum. What are the places people might live if you have unlimited money, but you still want to stay in that state? This list is subjective, and I'm sure there'll be people that disagree with some of my choices, but think of this more like a survey of just really rich places in some of these states. And I didn't go with just necessarily the most expensive or the actual wealthiest part of each state, because for almost every state, the richest zip code, the wealthiest town is going to be an enclave suburb of one of the bigger cities. And that might be the best place to be in some of those states if you are rich, but I wanted to go more with what is the vibe of that state. So for example, for Texas, if you're really rich, I wouldn't think a beach house represents Texas money, but for Florida, a beach house is exactly what would represent Florida money. So I'm trying to go with more what would be something that represents the vibe of that state, not necessarily the richest parts, but these are all pretty rich areas. Before we start, may I suggest patreon.com/geographyking. Help make my next video why I'm moving to one of these places. I'm going to go through the states in alphabetical order as opposed to putting in chapters, but the very first one is kind of weird. So for Alabama, I chose a small town called Mentone in the northeastern portion of the state. It's close to the Georgia state line, only about 45 minutes southwest of Chattanooga. I think of Alabama being more small town country-ish if you have a lot of money, but to be honest, most of the small towns in Alabama really aren't that nice, but this town is really nice. There's some nice scenery around there. You're at the southern end of the Appalachians. You got a state park right outside the town, so it's a really cool spot. Some nice big homes that a lot of people have as a second home for a lot of city slickers from Atlanta or Chattanooga, but yeah, pretty nice town, Mentone, in the northeast corner of the state. For Alaska, I'm going to Ketchikan, which is in the southern end of the southeast peninsula. So this is the part of Alaska that doesn't really get that cold during the winter, but you do get a lot of rain, a lot of gray skies, because you've got the same kind of climate as you have in the Washington coast and the British Columbia coast. But it is a beautiful area, some gorgeous scenery. It can be packed with tourists. Some of the cruise ships on those Alaska cruises will usually stop in Ketchikan, big crowds, but if you live there, you can avoid the town on those days. You can just enjoy the beautiful city on the times when the crowds aren't there and just be home doing nothing when they are. But beautiful area, and you can be in Alaska and not really be where it gets that cold during the winter. I know for Arizona, Scottsdale is kind of cliche as a place to go if you have a lot of money, but Arizona isn't known for its small towns, and most of the small towns in the state really aren't that nice. But Prescott and Sedona are both pretty nice, but I think if you have a lot of money in Arizona, you're thinking more city-ish, and Scottsdale is a really nice city, and you can still be back in the back parts of Scottsdale and have a big piece of land on a mountain where you can overlook the valley there. But I think it's a really nice spot. So if you have a lot of money, there's a cool downtown there. You're not in the city of Phoenix. And again, you can be kind of out in the country. You got some nice, beautiful mountain scenery, but be close to town and be around other really rich folks. For Arkansas, I'm going to Hot Springs. This is a really nice town in the west central portion of the state. It's home to Hot Springs National Park, which is the only natural national park that's also urban, so it's kind of strange like that. And as such, it can be touristy on spring and fall weekends and all summer long, but if you live there, you know when to avoid the crowds, and the scenery is beautiful. This is a great place you'd want to settle down. And Arkansas isn't known for its big cities, and I think Fayetteville, that area, has more of the growth and just more of the bigger city kind of stuff. But I think Arkansas is a little more laid back, smaller town, and this is just a really cool town in a beautiful part of the state. There's a lot of money in California, especially along the coast, but I think the California wealthy lifestyle isn't necessarily big city. Most people live in a big city, but I think it's more of these central coast kind of towns that I think of are the ideal for most Californians. I personally would take Monterey, but I think that's a little bit chillier than most people would like. But I'm pretty sure most Californians would love a chance to afford to live in a really nice place in Santa Barbara. Beautiful weather all year round, really nice downtown, and nice beaches. Just a really cool spot without it being in a big city. You have a lot of urban amenities, but without the crazy crowds of LA, the Bay Area, or San Diego. So a lot of money in Santa Barbara, but if you got it, it's a wonderful place to live. For Colorado, I'm definitely thinking smaller town in the mountains, so I'm going with Breckenridge, which can be a very touristy ski resort kind of town in the winter. But most of the really nice towns, the smaller towns in Colorado and the mountains, are going to be nice touristy areas as well, because it's a beautiful spot people want to visit. Beautiful area, of course. You're in Breckenridge. You're not right on I-70, so you're tucked away a little bit, but you're not really far away. So It's a good spot to live. You have nice connection to the main highways because you live in some of the more real rural areas of Colorado. You can get in some trouble with some landslides and wildfires and stuff, maybe being trapped in there a little bit. But yeah, Breckenridge, beautiful spot if you got the money. Okay, Greenwich, Connecticut, another one that's pretty cliche in terms of where the money goes, but this is really nice. You're right there at the southwestern corner of the state, really close to New York City, so you can have all that money, all that space right there on the Sound if you want, but you're really close to the city without having to live there, so that's a really great spot to be. Maybe you just prefer to be in Connecticut over New York State for whatever reason, and you got plenty of money. This is where I think the biggest money in the New York metro lives, except for maybe the penthouses and the buildings around Central Park. But if you want a big space, got a lot of money in the New York City metro area, you might very well want to be in Greenwich. And a lot of big time movers and shakers live there, but not everyone that lives there is super rich, but everyone's at least a little rich. When I think of Delaware, I think a little more reserved, kind of like that kid in the back of the class that never spoke up but is really smart. So that's kind of like how I see Delaware. So if you have a lot of money there, I'm thinking a little more small town, a little more laid back, but I want to be on the beach as well. So I think Bethany Beach is a really good spot to be if you got a lot of money. And yes, there are more popular, more party type beach towns in the state, but again, I'm thinking more reserved for Delaware. And you're certainly not going to have Bethany Beach to yourself. There'll be plenty of visitors there as well, but it isn't quite as packed as Dewey or Rehoboth. So if I had a lot of money, I'd want to be pretty close to the beach right there at Bethany. Florida, another state, ton of money. Definitely want to be on the beach if you have that money. So I'm going with Golden Beach, which is a suburb of Miami. It's a quiet little area, so you're right there in the thick of the big metro, but it's just kind of an enclave of the ultra-rich. And when you talk about South Florida, the ultra-rich is really rich. For some states, maybe like Oregon or North Carolina, the beach lifestyle is a little more laid-back, quiet beaches where you don't want to see anybody out there if you're out for a walk. But I think Florida is more about fun beaches. You're having a good time. There are going to be people there. You want to show off your hot body, show off your money. You want to be at the beaches in Florida for that kind of stuff. And if you have a ton of money, Golden Beach would be a great spot to live. Georgia was one of the more difficult ones for me to decide on for this list, but you got some nice sea islands. You have the beautiful Buckhead area and some of the northern suburbs of Atlanta, but ultimately I went with the mountain town of Blue Ridge. And this is a beautiful little town tucked in the southern Appalachians. Got a big lake right there, just nice woods. And in those summer, just those hot Georgia summers, it won't be as hot up there. There'll be a lot of boat traffic, a lot of people out on the lake during the summer, but you can get back there with your money onto a big house away from where all the people go. And I think if all the mountain towns and the lake towns in northern Georgia, Blue Ridge is the wealthiest one. And if I had a lot of money, that's where I'd be. Hawaii, I mean, in general, the entire state would be a great place to live if you're rich. But I would think if you're ultra rich, you might want to be on the island of Oahu, but not really in Honolulu or the suburbs. And that's why I'm going with the town of Kailua. But at the same time, you can easily get to Honolulu to do the big city type stuff, including getting to the airport. So it would be nice to be close to the city, close to the action, but not really in the thick of it. But again, Hawaii in general, if you're just really rich, you can basically throw a dart on a map of the state and you'll just find a great spot. Well, I guess unless you throw the dart and it hits the middle of Mount Kilauea. When I think Idaho, I'm definitely thinking smaller town, getting away from people, just having no neighbors whatsoever. So this town, McCall, is a small town in a very rural part of the state, but it can get very touristy in different parts of the year. So if you have a lot of money and you have an Idaho mentality, you don't want to be near people. So you want to be in this area, but maybe not in town, maybe several miles out of town on your big piece of property, people leaving you alone. But you can go into town where they have restaurants and shops and stuff that you'll want to go to, but you don't want to live amongst that. You don't want to hear the tourist chatter and just be away from those folks. That's kind of, I think, more the Idaho mentality. Be out on your own. And if you have a lot of money, this area around McCall is great. I mean, it's pretty good without the money, but it's even better with the money. I know people in other parts of Illinois don't like to think of the state being Chicago and nothing else, but I think if you have a ton of money and you're in Illinois, you want to be in the nicest, the wealthiest parts of the city of Chicago itself. And for me, that's the northeastern portion of it, from the right along the lake at Rogers Park as you go a little bit into the western area to the West Ridge and Forest Glen area. This whole part of the city is really nice. It's much bigger homes. And if you've ever seen the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where the kid at the end, he's got that big house and it's out in the wooded area, that's this part of Chicago. And that's a really beautiful spot to be. So you're close to all the really cool neighborhoods, Andersonville, Wrigleyville, those cool areas, but you're not really living there. Got a big house, nice property, so you can get on a train to get downtown if you want to. So great spot to have a lot of money if you're going to be in Illinois, northeastern Chicago. And not too far from there, going over to Indiana, I think a great spot to be if you have a lot of money is also the Chicago suburbs in the northwestern portion of the state, specifically Munster. This is a very nice suburb, bigger houses, bigger properties, got some nice water right there. It's a great spot to be if you're a suburbanite that has a lot of money. I think Indiana in general isn't a state known for its flashy, ostentatious wealth, so I think Indiana money is a little more quiet, a little more suburban. I think a place like Munster would be a really nice spot to live if you got the money. Going over to Iowa, another Midwestern state not known for its flashiness, I'm going to the Asbury neighborhood in the Dubuque area. In general, I believe northeastern Iowa is the prettiest part of the state, and I think Dubuque is the most interesting city in the state. And this part of the state is mostly rolling hills, very lush green, some bluffs along the Mississippi River. So if you're in Iowa and you want to be around a lot of nice scenery, you can go to the Driftless area in the northeastern portion of the state near Dubuque. And there are some really nice, beautiful historic homes in downtown Dubuque, but if you have the most money, you might want to be in the fanciest part of town, which is the west end of town in the Asbury neighborhood. And this is one of the most affordable places I'll mention in this video, so it's a really nice spot in a nice city in a good part of the state. Similar to Iowa, Kansas isn't known for its ostentatious wealth, but there are some really beautiful areas to live in, especially if you have the money. In general, my favorite part of the state is the kind of eastern central-ish portion of the state, and the area around Hutchinson is very nice, and I'm going with the Willowbrook area, which is kind of a suburb-ish of Hutchinson, but it's a very wealthy area, big houses, just a really nice spot. But I think that Great Plains mentality doesn't lead to these giant gaudy mansions and just this ridiculous wealth that's on display. So you have some really nice areas you can be in Kansas with money without really having to show it off too much. Kentucky is a pretty poor state, but it doesn't mean that everywhere in the state is poor, and the town I'm going with here is pronounced Versailles. It's just west of Lexington. It's a small town. I wouldn't call it a suburb, but you are within striking distance of Lexington to do the kind of city type stuff, but you're also in a very quiet small town. Old school, kind of southern Main Street, really nice place. But it's also known for some big time wealth out in the outside areas, some beautiful bluegrass scenery, people with horses, just a really gorgeous part of the state. So if you have the money to afford some of these really nice spots, we can have a big piece of land out there on your own doing your thing with maybe a horse. But yeah, great spot to be in the Versailles area. So you're surrounded by some of the larger metros in the state, but you're not in any of them. Just like Kentucky, Louisiana isn't known for its big-time wealth, but there are some nice parts of the state, including the town of Mandeville, which is on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, just across from New Orleans. But just like many of the other towns I'm mentioning in the video, you're still close to the big city. You're still close to the action, so you can get to New Orleans, do some of the fun stuff, but not have to live there. And Mandeville is very suburban, but you have some nice houses right there along the lake. You can get tucked away so you aren't on the lake and maybe out of the flood zone. But hey, you're rich. You can afford to rebuild after the flood. But I mean, Mandeville, really nice spot. So if you're going to be in the New Orleans metro area, the north shore of the lake is a pretty nice spot. For Maine, I'm not sure if I would go mountain, rustic, or coastal, but I'm going with a coastal town here called Boothbay. It's pretty small, but it's not too far from Portland, so you're within striking distance of the bigger city, as in many of the other places in this video. But it's also pretty quiet. It's nowhere near as busy from a tourist perspective as Bar Harbor and the Acadia National Park spot, but there will be plenty of visitors, so you can be tucked away. You can have a nice spot there on the water. You can be a little bit back away, inland away from the city as well. So yeah, just a really good area to have a lot of money. You can have a nice, beautiful house right there on the water. Just a really great spot and still be close to so many other cool things in Maine. It's a state that I really love. Maryland is a state that's mostly urban, suburban, or exurban, and I think money in Maryland is often associated with either the DC suburbs or maybe the Beach, but I would think Annapolis would be a great spot to live if you have money. It's a very expensive town, got a really beautiful historic downtown, but it's, again, it's really expensive. But if you do live there, you're still really close to both Baltimore and DC. You're just right there in all of it. And Annapolis itself is a good sized city with plenty of things on offer. But again, the money you can pay to get away from the downtown itself and have a really nice, beautiful spot away from it. Or with the money, you can buy one of those, beautiful old homes from the 18th century. So I think Annapolis is a place that it might be tough to be poor, but if you got the money, it's a wonderful spot. Another historic city in Massachusetts, I'm going to Lexington. This is in the northwestern suburbs of Boston, but it's pretty close. It's not way out there in the suburbs, and it's a very old city. At the time that the country was just being formed, it was separated from Boston, so it wasn't a suburb then, but certainly in the centuries since, it's been sucked in by the Boston metro area. I think kind of like Chicago, if you have a ton of money, you might want to be right in the city of Boston in some of the wealthiest spots, but I think the Boston suburbs, because they're just so old, they're not really suburbs, or older towns that were sucked in. And with Massachusetts having so much colonial history, I think being in an older colonial area is more Massachusetts-y than maybe being in a high-rise or a beautiful home in the city of Boston itself. But it's hard to go wrong in Massachusetts in general. It's one of the the best states for overall type stuff. But yeah, I like the suburb of Lexington. Really good spot right near Boston. If you're going to be in Michigan and you have money, you're going to want to be on the water. So if you have a ton of money, you're definitely going to want to be on the lake itself, have your own little dock and your own bigger boat. Traverse City is a really nice spot. It's very expensive. I think it's the most expensive place on the Lake Michigan side of Michigan. But if you got the money, it's a great spot to be. And like almost all these other places, you can be tucked away, not really in the downtown, but it's another cute little downtown that has more things you would expect a small town like that to have because there are so many tourists during the summer. I can see if you live in Michigan, you have unlimited money, you might rather be in one of those big houses in the Grosse Pointe area of Detroit. But I think what reflects Michigan more is a smaller town on a lake where you have your own dock and your own boat. And Minnesota is similar, where I think a lot of people with money might want to be in the wealthiest suburbs of the Twin Cities. I think that's Minnetonka Lakes, but I think the Minnesota mentality is more based on rural, woods, water. So I think the area in the southern end of the North Shore of Minnesota is where it's the nicest, where you get just past Duluth. Really nice spots there right along the lake, such as French River and Larchmont. And living in this part of the state can be pretty expensive. There are some shacks like that, but if you're rich, you're not living in a shack. There are some beautiful houses back there. So living here, you'd have the big lake right there. You got the woods right behind you. You got Duluth right down the road. That's pretty Minnesota right there. Mississippi is the poorest state in the country by most objective measurements, but it doesn't mean everybody there is poor, and there are some gorgeous places to be if you have money, including Natchez. This is one of those towns where you'll see a lot of those beautiful old southern stately homes with beautiful architecture, but they're not cheap. But if you're rich, you can afford one of these, and these are some gorgeous houses. The town is pretty laid back. It's small. There isn't a whole lot going on there. You do get some tourists on the weekends and during the summer, but there really isn't that much tourism there. So it's a little more laid back. It's not quite as busy as Vicksburg, and certainly not as busy as the beaches. I think in general, the northeastern corner of Mississippi is the wealthiest part of the state. But if you do have money, I would rather be in this older part of the state in one of those old houses in Natchez. Missouri is a state where I do think the best place to live if you're rich would be the wealthiest suburbs, and in this case I'm going to the St. Louis suburb of Ladue. I would normally not recommend being in one of the far out suburbs if you have money. If you have money, just go out in the wilderness, be out in the woods on your own, but I think an inner ring suburb like this could be a really nice spot. So this is just west of the western end of the city, and the west end of St. Louis, in my opinion, is the best area. This is where you have the Del Mar Loop, Forest Park, and some of the better neighborhoods in the city are in the western part. So when you're in the inner ring suburbs just to the west, you're pretty close to the city. And Ladue is just so well positioned within the St. Louis metro area. So again, you're so close to these nice spots where you're not in the city, but you can also get out of the metro relatively easily by going to the west or the north. So it's a really nice spot. So if you have the money to buy one of these giant houses, giant lots, it's a great place to live. And the last state I'll cover in this video is Montana, and I'm going to the Helena area, especially to the suburbs just to the northeast. The name of the suburb itself is actually just called Helena Valley Northeast. Helena is the state capital, so these probably aren't government workers back there, but there might be some rancher money, some oil money. But either way, it's money, and it's a lot of it, and these places are expensive, but they're beautiful. Similar to Wyoming or Colorado, if I had unlimited money, I probably wouldn't be near the national parks because there'd be just so many crowds there. So I wouldn't want to be around Glacier National Park or just north of Yellowstone there. So I'd want some gorgeous scenery. I mean, you're in Montana, that's what you want. But this area is very beautiful, but significantly fewer tourists. I don't see a born and bred Montanan with a ton of money wanting to be in a big cabin area in a resort town. I think they'd rather be in a big house like this off on their own, or maybe even farther out, but still in a really nice area, kind of like the northeastern region of Helena. So that's my take on the best place to live in each state if you're rich. And of course, there's going to be a difference of opinion for some folks. If you live in a coastal state, you'll always want to be on the beach if you're rich. Maybe you want to have a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Maybe you want to be in a penthouse of a skyscraper overlooking something. But I think all the places I chose are wonderful spots, and you probably wouldn't turn down an opportunity to move to one of these if you lived in that state. But if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography from a nerd. And if you're interested in some really nice wall maps, there's a link in the description to Muir Way maps. They make the best wall maps you can get. nice link in the description with a coupon code for a discount. And if you live in South Carolina and you don't have this map in your house, can you really call yourself a South Carolinian? Think about it. Go Cox. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially Emma D. Welcome to the club. Thank you. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. As always, thank you very much.